Hi, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Caroline Mandler. I'm the Executive Director of Wilton Library. So I want to welcome all of you tonight to this wonderful and important conversation between Jennifer Wallace and Susan Bauerfeld. On behalf of the library, our thanks to our co-sponsors, Wilton Youth Council, Thrive with a Guide, and Good Morning Wilton, the media sponsor for all of our author talks. Thank you also to Elm Street Books in New Canaan for being here. A portion of all of the sales go to the library, so we appreciate that. At the end of the program, it's going in and out. At the end of the program, following the Q&A, they'll be selling books. Jennifer will be signing until 8:30 p.m. So you can go ahead back to the back room and line up, and we'll meet you back there. So now I'd like to introduce Chandra Ring, Executive Director of Wilton Youth Council. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here tonight. We're so excited for this program and important conversation. I'm Chandra Ring, again, Executive Director of Wilton Youth Council. I want to specifically thank Carrie Ann Finelli and Heather Reading, Wilton Youth Council's Parent Education Chairs, for their work in making this program possible. And I also want to thank the library and all of your staff. Because of the wonderful attendance and all of you turning up, the library has really worked hard to make this event possible and meet those changing needs. So thank you very much, especially to Michael Bellacosa and Andrea Sato for their preparation for today. Wilton Youth Council has two upcoming events that I ask you to be on the lookout for. They are follow-ups to the conversation tonight. We have a book talk on Jennifer's book led by Wilton Public School Superintendent Dr. Kevin Smith coming up on Thursday the 26th, and then we will follow that up with a roundtable discussion on mattering on November 9th. So thank you very much for taking a look out for those. Now let's get to the people we're here to see. I'd like to introduce Susan Bauerfeld, who will lead the conversation with Jennifer. Susan's a licensed clinical psychologist, IFS trained therapist, speaker, workshop leader, parent coach, and the proud mother of 3 wonderful young adult sons. She has a private practice in Norwalk and is a popular speaker at national conferences, community forums on issues related to anxiety, child raising, learning challenges, managing technology, and coping with the college process. In all of her professional endeavors, she strives to help people get their shifts together by offering hope and tools for transformation that bring more compassion, calmness, curiosity, and connectedness to their relationships with themselves and others. And now a warm welcome for Jennifer Wallace. As you may know, Jennifer's an award-winning journalist and author of the New York Times bestseller, Never Enough, When Achievement Pressure Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It. She's a frequent contributor to the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and appears on national television to discuss her articles and relevant topics in the news. After graduating from Harvard, Jennifer began her journalism career at CBS 60 Minutes, where she was part of a team that won a Robert F. Kennedy Journalism Award. She's a journalism fellow at the Center for Parent and Teen Communication at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and serves on the board of the Coalition for the Homeless in New York City. Jennifer lives in New York City with her husband and their 3 children. Thank you so much. I can't wait for today's conversation.
Thank you.
So hello, Wilton. Welcome, Jenny here, who spent a lot of time researching her book. So you spent 4 years researching this book. What first got you interested in it, in this topic? How did you come to it, and how did you find yourself here in Wilton?
So first, thank you all so much for being here on a school night. I have spent so much time in Wilton, it felt a little bit like coming home. This was the first place that I reported from. And so what got me to this topic to begin with in 2019 was a few things. My oldest was going into high school, And it hit me, he's now a senior, working on his college essays while I'm here. It hit me that I had 4 years left to really instill all that I needed to give him the tools and resources to thrive when he moved out. And I thought, where should I be putting my parental energy? And I wasn't buying kind of the popular narrative that I should be on him all the time when it comes to college and all of that. I felt like maybe there was, anyway, I'm raising them on the Upper East Side. So basically, the belly of the beast. The other thing that happened in 2019, if you remember, was the Varsity Blues scandal. And that, I'm just going to hold this, or is that going to mess you up? Keep it in? Okay. I just want to be able to sit back. Sorry. Okay. So in 2019, there was the Varsity Blues scandal, where there were parents on the East Coast and the West Coast that got caught up in an illegal bribery scheme. And I couldn't believe that we had gotten to the point where parents were now going to jail to get their kids into a selective college like USC. How did we get here? I wasn't buying the narrative that parents just wanted the logo, which was the popular narrative in a lot of popular books and also in the press. I just felt like there was something deeper at play. And so those were the things that were going on.
Yeah. And so then you came to Wilton.
Yes.
And you started your research in Wilton.
I did.
Right?
I had, so I don't know if you remember Sonia Luther, who was a researcher. A lot of the book is based on her decades worth of research. She was, until she passed away, one of the world's leading researchers on resilience in the world. And actually, in 2019, right before I came to Wilton, I wrote an article for the Washington Post about how students attending what researchers call high-achieving schools, those are public and private schools like my kids go to, like your kids go to, those kids were now officially an at-risk group, meaning they were 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer from clinical levels of anxiety and depression, and 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer from substance abuse disorder than the average American teen. And so I wanted to know, what could I do to protect my kids in these environments? And so Sonia Luther, when I was interviewing her for that article, I said, who's doing it well? Who's trying to tackle this achievement pressure? And she said, you have to go to Wilton. And then I went to lunch the next week with Lenore Skenazy, who is the founder of the free range movement. And I was telling her about the book, and she said, you need to look up the women of Wilton. And I thought, okay, I'm going to start in Wilton. So that's those two sort of excellent sources for me brought me here. And boy, I think I should have looked this up before I came, but I think I've been to Wilton at least 5 or 6 times, speaking with dozens of families and administrators and psychologists. And I'm just so grateful for all of the families, some of whom are here because they've introduced themselves to me. When I didn't even meet you, I met you on Zoom or I met you on the phone. And I am just so grateful that you opened up. And I'm just so grateful for the hundreds and actually thousands of parents who have opened up to me in the process of writing this book. I have learned so much. It has changed my parenting, and it's changed my life.
Yeah. So you've thought very deeply about this and really understand in a way that isn't talked about a lot about where this came from. So can you talk a little bit about the cultural messaging and some of the things we say to our kids with the best of intentions that contribute to it?
Yeah, so I wanted to get to the root. I wanted to figure out, where was this coming from? Why was my childhood so different from my kids' childhoods? And so I spoke with historians and anthropologists and sociologists and psychologists, and I have a few reasons that are outlined in the beginning of the book. But the story that resonated most with me was what I call the economic story. So when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, life was generally more affordable. Housing was more affordable, healthcare was more affordable, higher education was more affordable. There was slack in the system. A parent could be, like mine, relatively assured that even with some setbacks, some bumps in the road, some failures, that most likely our generation, Gen Xers, would most likely be able to replicate their parents' economic status, if not do even better than their own parents did. That's been the American dream for generations. But modern parents like me, like you, we are facing a very different economic story. We are seeing the crush of the middle class. We are seeing the steep inequity that's been ushered in over the last few decades. We are sensing, whether we're cognizant of it or not, we are sensing fewer and fewer guarantees for our kids. And so this intensive parenting that everybody talks about, what I have found in my research, it takes its roots in the idea that we are sensing fewer social structures, fewer safety nets for our kids. And so parents, in particular mothers, are tasked with weaving these individualized safety nets for each one of our kids. We are hoping, and I'm about to get to the second part of your question, we are hoping that early childhood success, getting our kids into a, quote, good school, a good college, we hope will act as a kind of life vest in a sea of economic uncertainty. We don't know what half the jobs are going to be. AI is now on the scene. Again, we are sensing fewer safety nets, but we're hoping that if we can just strap on that life vest of a college, that they will be able to stay afloat. And unfortunately, what I'm seeing, what I saw in the reporting and what Sonia found in her research and other researchers, is that that life vest that we are trying so hard to protect our kids with is acting like a lead vest for too many of the kids. And, this is not to blame parents. These are pressures that are bigger than any one family, any one school, and any one community. But it's also not to let us off the hook. So I will leave, this is a long answer, but I will say that what I have found in the research, and it comes out in our messaging, is that parents are absorbing these macroeconomic forces and becoming social conduits, preparing our kids for an uncertain and fearful future. And so it comes out in our anxiety, it comes out in our safety culture, it comes out in pushing our kids earlier and earlier, raising the bar, pushing them to meet it. So our kids, growing up, our parents would be able to enjoy our success. But now we, as parents, feel like it's our responsibility to make our kids a success. And that is the messaging that is destroying our relationship with our kids and destroying too many kids.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but we have talked about it before. The confusing messages between this, you have to be successful, and then messages like, I just want you to be happy. Mm-hmm. Or the only thing that matters is, that you live up to your potential, or be your best self every day. So can you comment on how that contributes inadvertently to this issue?
I mean, I had this, I talk about it in the book. So my son was in 5th or 6th grade, and he was working on his first paper of 3 pages. And he sat in front of the computer for literally 2 hours. And I walked into his room and I said, William, just do your best. And he's like, I'm 11. I do not know what my best is. So when we are telling our kids to do their best, what does that mean? And boy, is that a tremendous pressure to always do your best. It's exhausting to live like that. Yeah. And one of the stories you shared with me that I found so endearing and helpful in just acknowledging that we sort of fall into this is the architecture story. Oh, yeah.
Is that something you'd like to share?
Yeah, Tamron Hall, I was on Tamron Hall's show on Monday, so I shared it with millions of viewers. Before I researched this book, I would, in the vein of wanting to prepare my kids to be successful, I would always find myself really anxious in September when I was putting together their calendars. And particularly with my oldest son, I was like, what am I missing? What latent talents am I not fostering in this kid? He's not the soccer star. He's not great at chess. He's not showing any artistic ability. What am I missing as a parent? And so then I was like, you know what? He loves architecture and design. That's, when we would travel, he would notice facades. He would get sort of obsessed when we were in the grocery store in the produce section with the contraption that cuts the plastic bags. He wanted to know how that worked. And I was like, isn't that the seed of passion? Isn't this my job to foster it, to make him the architect and industrial designer that he is meant to be? And so I call up, I Google up before he gets home from school, I'm like, intro to architecture and design courses. And I start calling, and I start at the top with the Cooper Hewitt, which is part of the Smithsonian Institute and around the corner from my house. So I'm like, do you have any design classes for sixth graders? And they're like, no, we do not. So anyway, I kept going down the list. And finally, one school did bite in a neighborhood called Hell's Kitchen. And it was the kind of school that I pictured above a deli. And the guy picked up the phone, and I pictured it just one big room. And he says, yeah, I could give you, this is really meant for college students, but if you sit next to him in class, and of course pay for the 2 seats, he can take this class. And so William came home that day, and I said, honey, I found you a class, Intro to Architecture, and I'm going to do it with you. And he's like, Mom, I love architecture. Please don't ruin it for me. So that, yeah, my kids always kind of put me in my place.
Yeah.
Not afraid.
Yeah. So before we move on to some of the solutions, is there anything else you want to share about the problem that you discovered as you were doing your research?
It's both the problem and the solution. Mm-hmm. Should I say that?
Sure.
So we're going to talk about the solution, which is really the solution of mattering. But the thing that I found most surprising in my research was that the number one intervention for any child in distress is to make sure the primary caregivers, most often the mothers or the fathers, that their well-being and their support system is intact. Because in the words of Sonia Luthor, a child's resilience rests fundamentally on the resilience of the adults in their lives. And adult resilience rests fundamentally on the depth and the support of their relationships. And this is sort of the chapter that I talk about with Wilton. It is not that the parents I met here and on the Upper East Side and in Washington State and everywhere, these parents all had friends. What they didn't have was the time and the emotional bandwidth to deepen the friendships so that those friendships could be sources of support when they needed them. So I have a funny scene. It's funny now, it wasn't funny at the time, with Sonia Luthor at a restaurant in Arizona. She lived in Arizona. We were having margaritas and fish tacos. And I was scribbling on my yellow notepad. And I said, so when you're talking about parent resilience, are you is that thinking I'm totally getting it now, is that the put your oxygen mask on first? Is that what you're saying? And she slammed her hand on the table. And she said, that is not what I'm saying. Oh my gosh. And she said, I don't want tired parents to have one more thing on their to-do list. I want you to have people in your life, 1 or 2 or 3 friends outside the home, and I'll get into why that is, who know you intimately, who you can be vulnerable with, and who can be vulnerable with you. To basically have people surrounding us who know us well enough that when we are at the end of our rope, when we are gasping for breath, that they will reach over and put the oxygen mask on for us. And that is a very different level of friendship, and it requires a kind of intentionality that we have stopped giving to friendships. We now give it to travel soccer. So what I am here to say, and the biggest takeaway, one of the biggest takeaways for me in the book, is to be as intentional with your friendships outside the home as you are with the specific, karate coach or the league that you want your kids to get in, to be intentional. And if you can't do it for yourself, as Sonia Luther said it to me, then do it for your kids. And the reason, just to tie this up with a bow, the reason why significant others, partners, marriages, the reason your partner can't be that go-to person for you is because our households are already stressed, trying to be one household villages. So you need one or two people outside of your home, and it doesn't mean hours of, mom's nights out. It's 1 hour a week, according to the research out of the Mayo Clinic and other subsequent studies. 1 hour of intentional time a week where you are seen and heard and cared for the way you try to be for your own children.
And in the Harvard study of adult well-being, which is the longest running study of adults and adult development, the single most important factor is connectedness. So they call it connectedness. And it just means that you have at least 2 or 3 people who've got your back. We'll put that oxygen mask on for you. And these people live longer, are healthier, and are happier. And it boils down to these connections. They're super important.
Yeah.
So getting to solutions here, you spent a lot of time with some healthy achievers.
Yes.
So can you talk about what you learned from the healthy achievers?
Yeah, so as both a journalist, but also as a parent, I wanted to know who are the kids who are doing well, despite the pressures in the environment. I wanted to know what, if anything, they had in common. What was home life like for them? What was school like? What were their relationships like with their peers? And I go through it all in the book, but essentially it boils down to this idea of mattering. Mattering is an idea that was conceptualized, was created, coined by Morris Rosenberg, who was a legendary sociologist who also coined the idea of self-esteem in the 1960s. What he found in the 80s when it came to mattering was that kids who enjoyed a healthy level of self-esteem felt like they mattered to their parents, meaning they felt valued, they felt important, they felt uniquely seen and known. And it's been studied since the 1980s, and the research on it, the definition that resonates the most with me and I think is getting the most traction in the field is this and what I saw actually on the ground in my reporting is that mattering involves 2 motives: feeling valued and adding value. So the kids I found who seemed to be suffering the most were kids who either felt like their mattering was contingent on their performance, as in they only mattered when they made the A team, when they got the good grades, or, and this surprised me and changed what I did in my own parenting, the other kids who didn't seem to be doing as well as the healthy strivers felt like they mattered to their parents. They felt important, they felt significant, but they were never asked or relied on to add value back to anyone other than themselves and their own resumes. And so what these kids lacked was social proof that they mattered. They heard it in words, but they did not see how they could have a positive impact on their home life or with their peers or with the larger community. So the kids I met who were really thriving, this mattering acted like a protective shield. It didn't mean that these kids didn't have failures and setbacks. They were down, they were anxious sometimes, but what mattering did, it acted like a kind of buoy that lifted them up. It helped them to be resilient.
Yeah, and there was an article today in the Times about play and the free play, Lenore, who spoke about this. It's a very small study, but still significant, where they took 5 anxious kids and they just said, what do you want to do by yourself that you haven't done by yourself yet? And it could be anything, walk to the store, cook dinner, take out the garbage by myself. And they found the kids were less anxious. And I think it's because of this sense of their sense of agency, their sense of being valuable, that they can do something that makes a difference somewhere, even if it's just like, my mom doesn't have to go with me to the store.
Yeah.
You know, that can really help a child. So
just a little more on mattering, because I'm completely obsessed with it. It is, so the researchers who study it say that after the human need for food and shelter, it is the instinct to matter that drives human behavior for better and for worse. So when we feel like we matter, we show up to the world in positive ways. We want to contribute. We want to get good grades. We want to be a functioning member of our classroom. We want to give back. We want to be good to the environment. But when we are made to feel like we don't matter, there are two pathways we can take to deal with that horrible feeling. We can either turn inward and get anxious and depressed, maybe turn to substances to squelch that feeling, or we can act out in anger. Oh, I don't matter. I'll show you I matter. And I think we're seeing that on an international stage right now. But that instinct to matter never goes away. It starts early. It's particularly important in adolescence when our kids are now building this sense of who they are. Mattering really does help and encourage healthy growth, a healthy sense of self. So mattering has changed my life. It is really, it's actually the topic of my next book, Mattering for Adults, because what I found in the Healthy Strivers was that their parents had a very strong sense of mattering to themselves. We were just talking about this at dinner. Many of the parents of the Healthy Strivers would do things for themselves just because they were worth it. Not because they wanted to model it for their kids, but because they deserved the rest. They deserved the break. They deserved the nap. And so mattering to ourselves as caregivers is important both for us and for modeling, but also for our resilience as being those first responders that we need to be for our children day in and day out.
So what solutions, since you're here in Wilton,
Yes.
what solutions did you see that were helping these healthy strivers? And maybe some people here aren't aware of those resources here.
So one of the things that I found was protective. There's a sentence that Rick Weisbord, who's at Making Caring Common at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, he said this to me, and it was a light bulb moment. He said, our children's sense of self becomes stronger, less by being praised than by being known. And that I really took to heart, and I thought, how do I know my kids? You know, it's so hard sometimes to really know what uniquely makes our kids tick, because it's so much a part of who they already are that we can lose sight of it. And so one of the things that I recommend in the book, and one of the things I did with my family, is we took something called the VIA survey. Has anybody heard of that? I hadn't. It's Values in Action Survey. It's a free online tool that was developed by the two leading researchers of positive psychology. They basically invented the field. And the names of the scientists are Marty Seligman and Christopher Peterson. And it's a short quiz. They have an adult version and they have a version for our kids. And we did it together as a family. And my daughter actually printed hers out. My boys did not. They did the quiz, but they did not print it out. And so like when my daughter was in 7th grade and there was drama at the cafeteria table, I said to her, well, which of your strengths could you use to help you with that obstacle, help you cope with that? And one of her strengths is humor. And she said, I know, I can be sarcastic. When there's drama that gets kicked up, I can make a joke, I can be sarcastic. And she's actually very good at being sarcastic now. She's leaning into that strength. So that's one of the things that we did. And when so after Rick Weisbord said that to me about the self becomes stronger, less by being praised than by being known, we started a tradition in our family. This was 5 or 6 years ago, where every birthday we say one thing we love about the birthday boy or girl. And it's never that you got an A in math or that you won the winning goal. It's always, thank you for putting your math work aside to help me with my homework, and always sacrificing your time to help me. That was what my daughter said to my son in his last birthday. And so it's helping our kids get a sense of their strengths and what it is we love about them, away from achievements, away from successes. Another thing that I've started doing. I don't know if they do this at Wilton, but my kids' schools have a narrative. So you get a grade, but then you also get a narrative. And I have found that teachers are extraordinarily perceptive of our kids' strengths. And so I started annotating their report cards. So I'd get them and I'd be like, oh my God, I see this too. Yes, this is awesome. And I put it in something I call their baby boxes, which are just these big boxes that are not filed, and I just throw things into them. But we go through them sometimes, and these strengths that they have been present from the very beginning. And my kids have learned how to use these strengths now to overcome obstacles. And that is a way of being resilient, but it's also a way of feeling like you are known for who you uniquely are, that you matter. That is a way of enforcing mattering.
Yes, so really appreciating and sending appreciation to their strengths, not just giving lip service, but really appreciating, wow, I really appreciate this about you.
Yes.
So what are some other ways that parents can help children feel like they matter?
Well, when you think about the ingredients of mattering, appreciation is one of them. Giving them the opportunity to add value at home, at school, and in the wider community. So at home, I have tried year after year to give chores to my kids. I even wrote about it for the Wall Street Journal. It's been a big failure in my home. But I will say that mattering revived it. And so, first of all, I stopped calling them chores. So I rebranded it as Family Matters, things that we need to do in the family to help the family function. And so we have these, what we call, I did not name this is an Alfred Adler, who was a contemporary of Freud. One of his terms was the family meeting, which really can make your eyes glaze over, but it's a 10-minute meeting. He made it 20 minutes, I made it 10. 10-minute meeting in our house every week, where it's my husband and our 3 kids. We each take turns. One person keeps track of the time, another person has the agenda, and another person reads out what the family matters are. So I'll give you an example. So on a Saturday, so instead of having set chores, these sort of come up in the family meeting. So I'll raise an issue and I'll say, we have a real problem with the shoes at the front door. We have a closet that's literally, we live in an apartment. It's not far. It's 4 steps away. And so I said, why are the shoes never making it into the closet? And my son, and you walk in and you're tripping over them. And he said, you know what? Because everybody just flops them in the closet, and then you're running late for school and you can't find the other shoe. So we all just kind of keep our shoes lined up by the door. He says, it's not really working for me. It's not nice to our guests. So how can we solve this? And he was like, you know what? If I went on Amazon, I bet I could buy like a $20 shoe rack, and then we could have our shoes lined up and we wouldn't have that issue. And guess what? He found the shoe rack, we line it up, it's no longer an issue. So I guess what I'm saying is, the way you can instill mattering is asking your kids to help you solve a family problem and to actually put effort into solving that family problem. So if chores aren't working for you, try the family meeting. It actually really did work. And my kids were skeptical. We started it in their teens. And the way I got buy-in was that they looked at the clock. I mean, I could basically get buy-in for anything. If I say we're timing it, it's not gonna be more than 2 minutes. Yeah. And that's why I cut the meeting down to 10.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I talk about this in terms of a shift, it's the shift to having the children be the focus of the problem to being part of the solution. Mm-hmm. And when they feel like they're part of the solution, they feel that sense of mattering more.
Yes, yeah. Exactly.
So one of the things I particularly love that you talk about in the book is being a balance keeper. And how important a role that is, and how we've kind of lost sight of it.
Yes.
So can you speak to that a little bit?
So, we are told by society, by the societal messages, that it is our job as parents to push our kids to excellence, to have them achieve, their full potential. But what I found among the healthy strivers was that their parents took a different route. Instead of encouraging everything, instead of encouraging all the APs, encouraging all the activities, they actually set up guardrails, and they set up limits, and they said, you are worth protecting. I am not going to let you take all those APs. It's not healthy for you. I want you to be able to get 9 hours of sleep. I want you to be able to have time as a family and time with your friends. And what I found among these achievers was that it wasn't that they were thriving despite that. I think they were thriving because of it. Because their parents encouraged and focused on their kids mattering away from their achievements, that they mattered inherently for who they were deep at their core, that these kids were able to reach for even higher goals. They put themselves out there. They weren't afraid to fail because failure did not feel like an indictment. So they felt secure enough to try things, to reach out to friends and get rejected because they knew they could go home and they would have a safe base to recover. So with these parents focused on at home, Sonia Luther said to me, and I quote her in the book, when we were growing up, the pressures were not, the Gen X, I'm talking, not millennials, but Gen Xers, there wasn't so much pressure in the environment. Today there's pressure in the classroom, with the classmates' peers, with the coach, with the kids on the travel team, with messages about college, with messages on social media, that Sonia Luther said, home needs to be a haven from that pressure. It needs to be a place where your kids can recover, a place where they know their value and their worth is never in question. And what I found, and I found this, I didn't expect to find this, but in those homes, these kids were performing well because they had what I call in the book a kind of healthy fuel. So I forgot what the question was, but
you answered it, but
Okay.
you also, when we were talking about this, you mentioned 4 questions that Tina Payne Bryson, who co-wrote The Whole Brain Child with Dan Siegel, this is not in the book, so it's a gem that went directly to Jenny, and now I have it. So there are 4 questions that she suggested you can ask to see what is the balance, get curious. Get curious about in your home, what is the balance, or is there balance?
And what are the messages your kids are getting about how you prioritize performance and achievement? And so the first question is to take a look at your child's calendar and to see how they're spending their time outside of school. Is there time in their day, in their week, for family time, for playtime, or if you're with a teen, chilling out with their friends, and family time? And that's Challenge Success is a nonprofit, and they call it PDF, that every child and teen, and I would argue adults, need PDF every day. So one thing is look at the calendar. The second thing is look at how you spend your money as it relates to your kids. How much are you spending on achievement-oriented goals, coaching, tutoring, math classes, etc. The third thing she said was take note of what you ask your children about. When they walk in the door, what's the first thing out of your mouth? Before I researched the book, I will tell you, it was usually, how'd you do on the Spanish quiz? And what I have learned in researching the book is that when I start with that question, my child thinks, my God, this is what she's been thinking about all day. And so instead now I lead generally with lunch. And I ask my kids, what'd you have for lunch? Who'd you hang with? What'd you do on the playground at lunch? And then the last thing, which is, I think, very telling, notice what you argue with your kids about. So if you look at their calendar, your money, what you ask about, and what you argue about with your kids, it will tell you a lot about what the signals you are sending to your children about how much you prioritize achievement.
Okay, so we're just about to Q&A. Is there anything else you really want to say that you feel like you have not?
So Mark Brackett, who's at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, once gave me some reflective advice. He said, think about your kids 10 to 20 years from now. What is the story you want them to tell about their childhood and about their relationship with you? And then ask yourself if you're helping them tell that story.
Okay, so we're going to open it up to questions. We don't have a lot of time for questions, so we're going to request that you ask general questions that will be helpful to the audience as a whole, and that you steer clear of the deeply personal questions. This is a big room. So we'd like to open it up to anyone who has a question.
I will also say, if you do have a personal question, what I'm offering is if you go to my Instagram, Jennifer Breheny Wallace, and DM me, I am addressing a lot of personal questions that come up in my talks on Reels. I don't say your name, but I say a parent asked me, because often your deep, intimate question is something that other people are wondering too. So you can always DM me, and I will try to make a reel out of it without, anonymously. Anyway.
Okay, so we had one over here.
Hi, my name is Lori Fields. I'm the executive director at the Teen Center here in Wilton. One of my questions is, how do we start to address this as a community? So how do we work collaboratively with the schools, with the after-school programs, and with sports, so that we all come together to send a united message?
Yeah, it is going to take all stakeholders, parents, teachers, administrators, coaches, to buffer against these rising pressures. So I actually had that question come up from early readers of my book. And so I co-founded a nonprofit called the Mattering Movement. And it should be, if you buy a book, I put a bookmark in there. I offer free resources for students and for teachers, and also resources for parents to create cultures of mattering. So what I find so exciting about mattering is that it is a sticky framework. And so researchers who study it call it a meta need, and underneath it is belonging, all these things that everybody's talking about separately: belonging, connection, self-determination, mastery. They all fall under this umbrella of mattering. So if we could all adopt the language, our kids will hear the message from their coach, from their teacher, from their parents. That is a way of sort of shifting the culture. So head to the Mattering Movement. We have resources. We're trying to solve exactly for that.
And we were talking about this at dinner. And one of the things that's sticky about mattering is that we all know what it means. It's just very evident what it means. And if you can just shift your attention and energy sometimes to mattering, it's going to make a big difference. Let
me say one more thing, plug for mattering, is that unlike belonging and connection, you can make your kids matter. So I have a story. I have a story that I don't include in the book because it's personal, but I'll tell all of you. Is my son? I'll just make this really fast. My son was in just talking about the stickiness of it. My son was a freshman during COVID. And we were living in New York, so we pulled him out. We were, privileged to be able to leave New York City during that time. But he was reporting to me how lonely he felt. And so when he came back to school, he still was talking about the loneliness. They were masked, they were wearing the necessary masks, and social distancing, and he really wasn't feeling connected. And as a parent, how can I make him feel connected? I can't make him feel connected, but I can make him feel like he mattered. So he came home from school in the spring and he said, Mom, my friends asked me to join the JV baseball team because they don't have enough players, but it's really going to interfere with my schoolwork. It's 2 to 3 hours of a commitment after school. And before I researched this book, I know I would have said, you know, baseball's not really your thing. Maybe you should spend that time in your schoolwork. You're more like a debate guy. Put the time in there. And instead, I said, you know what? This is how he will matter. So I said, do you want to do it? And he said, I really do. And he did, and it set him up on the best positive spiral of his high school career. He felt every day that he mattered to his classmates. Literally, without him, they would not play. So that is what's sticky, right? As a parent, as an educator, as a counselor, you can dial up kids mattering in a way that you can't dial up connection and belonging as easily. Does that make sense?
And the connection and belonging will fall from the matter.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Any other questions? Wow, quiet group.
Oh, we have somebody.
Hi, thank you so much. This is amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. It might be a little bit tricky. So sometimes it's easy to kind of tell your kids, you know, to really appreciate what they're doing well, to help them identify their strengths. How do you manage it on the other end when it doesn't become, I'm good at this? You know, like, yes, you want confidence, but you want it enough for them to stay humble.
Yep. So let me answer your question the way I thought you were going to ask me, which was, you know, what happens when they don't hit the mark or whatever. So to send the signal to our kids that they matter, we need to have standards. We need to believe in them. We need to have a bar. The bar needs to be adjustable. It needs to be appropriate for the child. So when you get a PhD in your kid, you know what they're able to do. And so instead of focusing on shiny outcomes like, you know, why aren't they getting the A in math? Instead, to focus on how the work gets done at home. You know, whether it's a sport or whether it's a schoolwork, it's helping scaffold how work gets done. In our family, when we're on a sport, here's how we handle it. When we're taking a class that we're maybe not doing as well as we could be doing in it, here's how we work for that. We come home after school, we take a short break, we sit at a clean desk, we put light on, we charge our phone in another room, et cetera, et cetera. When you're talking about humility, boy, do I love that. That is humility. I write about it, I think, in chapter 7. Humility is such a intellectual humility and also just regular humility. It is, there's a phrase, it's not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking about yourself less. And so how can you help your child think about themselves less? By introducing a need in the world, by helping them to open their eyes to genuine needs in their community or genuine needs in their home. So I don't know if either of those answered your question.
I love that. That's
Okay.
really big because it does shift focus from just the attention on them.
That's right.
To how much impact they could make in the world around them.
Yes.
It was awesome.
Okay, great. I'm going to give you a phrase that I'm obsessed with. So I went to a Jesuit school. I was lucky to travel all over the country and go into many schools, including Wilton. And there was a phrase at the school, which is a Jesuit phrase, but I think it's something I adopted in our home. And it is not better than others, but better for others. How can we raise our kids to be better for others? And we don't often do that in our hyper-individualistic society. But boy, is that protective. Humility is protective. Humility tells us we don't do it all on our own. We need other people. You know, this myth of independence, that the ultimate goal of parenting is to raise an independent, self-reliant adult. That is a myth that is not working for us as a society. I found in my research and in my meeting at schools and families a deeper skill that we need to give our kids if we want them to be healthy strivers, and that is the skills of interdependence. Knowing how to rely on others and have others rely on us in healthy ways. So that is a way of moving the lens outwards to healthy interdependence. Thanks for your question.
Hey, any other back here?
Thank you. This has been great.
Thanks.
So the question is the level of interaction and support from parent. What's the sweet spot with the kids?
Yeah.
In other words, you know, what you see is kids so involved in their kids' lives. And you say, well, in the 70s, we would have let the kid fail, and then he'd still end up okay. Those are my friends. Yes. But now we are nervous about that. So what's the sweet spot? When do you bail your child out because he's made a bad mistake? He didn't do his homework. He doesn't know how to write that paper. And families and parents, they want to be involved and they want to help. When is it too far? When is it not enough?
So I'm going to also let Susan answer this, but I would say to get curious, not furious. Children want to do well. So we need to figure out what is the obstacle. Why are they not doing well? Actually, a lot of the families that I met with, when they got curious, found that their kids actually had a learning difference. And, or they found that, you know, when they got curious and asked the teacher what was going on at school, that the child really wasn't connecting with anybody in the classroom. So that can take up like serious cognitive resources away from schoolwork. So what I would say as a parent is to get curious, not furious, about why they're failing and get to the bottom of it and make the assumption that kids want to do well. And lead with that. So I don't have an answer for when to bail them out, when to not. I mean, I think it's hard. I think it is hard to know. And I think that's why you have to get the PhD in your kid. Is this a child who generally is really together and organized? And I don't have time to drop off my kids' homework and things like that because I'm working, but I don't know if there was something that like my daughter, who's so type A and really good executive functioning skills, if she messed up something, I'd help her. That's interdependence. If she was a child who was routinely not figuring it out, I would help her by getting support, getting some aid there. So really seeing, is this a pattern? Is this a one-off? And getting to the root of what it is. And I think that'll give you your answer.
And the other thing to be curious is what happens inside you as a parent when you see this in your child. And often our own anxiety about what's happening will block our ability to really see what's going on with them. So that's another piece of the curiosity. I'm going to share a story that's not my story. This is from Liz Jorgensen, who's a local therapist. But I heard her at a talk talking about one of her students who was having trouble in math. And the parents were like, what is going on? They're failing. We need tutors. We need all this stuff. And took a couple sessions, but finally the student said, Mrs. Jorgensen, this was a male student. The girl in front of me wears a thong and I just cannot concentrate.
That is hilarious.
So sometimes our own fear about what's going on becomes what we act on instead of what's actually going on. So they moved the seat and the kids started doing a lot better in math.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Yeah. So, any other here?
So I'm loud enough. I'm a Texan. Okay, great. I'm a Texan. I can yell. First of all, the three of us all work at a Jesuit school, and our yearly theme this year is for others. So you like struck a chord back here. So we also all work in student support in some way. I work in campus ministry. My friend here is the social worker, and we are constantly dealing with young boys who are overachieving, who are involved in so many things. And I think what we have maybe noticed is that the parents don't have that support that you talk about too, right? Like, how can we partner with the parents, but also really like support our boys in kind of a primary way?
So I have a section in the book, Confronting Grind Culture, and I talk about how grit and growth mindset, I don't really say grit, I say mostly growth mindset, how as an intervention across the board, this is according to researchers, is not necessarily great for hyperachievers. Right? Just the idea that just be gritty, that those boys that you're talking about, it's not that they lack grit or lack growth mindset. It's that they lack self-regulatory skills to know when to stop, when to pull back, when to go to bed, when to stop studying. That is a skill that they need to learn, and their parents need support.
And that's where the balance keepers come in.
Yes, exactly.
And the balance keepers. And then can you just mention, and then we have to stop, we're at time, Sonia Luther's program for community support for parents.
So Sonia put together something called Authentic Connections, which is, it meets via Zoom with people you don't know, but who have a similar background to you. And it's, about 5 women once a week for 8 to 12 weeks. I think it's 8 weeks. Oh, no, I think it's 12 weeks. It's 12 weeks now. And it's 1 hour a week, and it's 1 hour of intentional time. It's not a therapy session. It's just a time to be heard, to be seen, to be supported, so that we can be there for our kids.
And we can build these ourselves. We don't need the program. The program helps. It's helpful. But this is something we can do as a community, is to find some of those connections.
Yeah.
So. Thank you, Jenny.
I'm going to just give a plug to Women of Wilton. There is an organization that actually does do that. And Vanessa in the front row has a Facebook page called the Women of Wilton. And it meets once a month. And you can go, and I call, Vanessa really a re-villager. She is trying really hard to put this village back, not just in Wilton, but just kind of, around the country. So anyway, Women of Wilton.
Women of Wilton. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Thank you all so much.
We're going to be
Thank you.
signing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.